Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Ryan, and today we are doing the full off-season recap for the Tennessee Titans. It's going to be a lot of fun going over all of their departures and also new acquisitions and kind of reviewing the draft picks. Then at the end of the video, we will be going over the 2024 schedule and giving our record predictions. So be sure to stay tuned all the way to the end so you can hear how Ryan and I think the Titans will do this season. Before we do that, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel and also ring that bell to get notified whenever new content comes out. We are doing a full offseason recap for all 32 teams in the NFL. We have videos coming out once a day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So ring that bell to get notified when new videos come out. Ryan, let's pull up the 2023 team rankings. So we got these numbers from Pro Football Reference as well. So these are just team offense, team rushing stats as well. Titans ended up going 6-11 last year. And it was an interesting season just because you can kind of tell there was that transition going on from Ryan Tannehill. One, just not seeing the performance on the field, just in general. But then he ended up getting hurt. Will Levis comes in. And, of course, his first game against my Falcons, and he had a horrible showing against the Falcons. No one will ever remember that showing at all. Obviously, I'm being very sarcastic. Amazing game, 4 touchdowns. Instantly, I knew Will Levis was a better quarterback than Desmond Ridder in that game. And so that's why I kind of think, too, part of it statistically.
Not saying much, by the way.
Not saying much. It's a very low bar, I would say. I might be a better quarterback on Madden than Desmond Ridder. I'm just joking. So I say that with that transition with the rookie quarterback coming over here, I think that kind of explains a little bit of their offensive stats a little bit more. I think more guys in the box to kind of help prevent some of the rushing. But also, too, the stat that really sticks out to me, which I think was the epitome of the Titans' offseason goal, which I think they accomplished, which we'll get to in a little bit. But their offensive line was terrible. 29th in overall sacks allowed, 64. Honestly, too, one of the sacks, I think it was week 16 or week 17 where Will Levis got sacked. And I remember we were watching it. His leg got eviscerated by one of the sacks. And so luckily it was just a sprain, so they just rested him because it is what it is. It was the last game of the season. They weren't going anywhere. But you could tell, I think, off-season goal was to fix that offensive line. I think they did that, but it did come a little bit at a cost. I think they had to let some guys go. We're going to get into the departures here in a second. But, Ryan, I want to throw it over to you here first. Get your overall thoughts on the offensive team rankings and anything that kind of sticks out to you defensively.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the running game was better than I originally thought. I think that just goes to show when you have Derrick Henry back there, he can even kind of turn a bad offensive line into a manageable run game. He is not there anymore, speaking of the departures. And also, I do think that the defensive stats were better than I thought as a whole. I remember going through, they did not have a great pass defense this year, but going and looking at it, they're only 18th in yards allowed through the air. 13th against the run, but that I thought that front seven was pretty good all year, and the liability was the back end. But I guess they were just kind of slightly below average. So that's good, right on the league average there with 45 sacks at 16th, and then also just below league average with 21 turnovers. And so, to me, the big thing here that sticks out with the defensive stats is why the Mike Vrabel firing. I think he was the defensive coach. He didn't have a lot to work with on the back end of this defense, and like it still was a league average defense. And then this offense showed at moments that it could be better. And so, like, why not run it back with Mike Vrabel, who's proven to be a really good NFL coach, and then get a new OC in there. That's my thoughts.
I have no evidence of this, but I think there was definitely some politics that were going on in there because Mike Vrabel had, from my knowledge, no involvement in the A.J. Brown trade at all, and so that really screwed the offense and setting them up as well. And then you go and get Treylon Burks with that pick, and he hasn't panned out. He's been dealing with some injuries, and so there's still some hope in there. But even as we get the acquisitions, we'll go and show you, they're adding a lot of other receiving talent just for this year, try and be competitive. But I think it's a good segue, though, into departures as well. I think it's one of the things. So Mike Vrabel, as you talked about, has departed off. So there's a new regime that's coming in. Also, too, they've lost some very serious guys here as well. Yeah. Aaron Brewer was a starting center, played the entire season, all 100 snaps. Cecil Shire a little bit farther down the screen. He was one of the key players as well. Danico Autry was their sack leader at 11.5 sacks. Then you mentioned Derrick Henry. That was an obvious one. Andre Dillard was their left tackle. Maybe that's a good riddance because they just didn't
Yeah,
have the
I don't
overall
think I
performance.
don't think he was healthy a lot last year. I
And
think
that's
it
fair.
was Nicholas Petit Frere for a large majority of the time.
Yeah, and that's fair. But Sean Murphy Bunting also too, Kayvon
Yeah.
Wallace, Chris Moore, Andre Dillard, Derrick Henry, as already mentioned, Calvin Throckmorton as well. All those guys played about 50% or more of their overall snaps. So there's a lot of guys that have moved on from the team,
Yeah.
specifically too. And I'm not as concerned with, I would say, the offensive lineman because I think that they have improved in that area. Yes, you lose Aaron Brewer, but they did get Lloyd Cushenberry, who we'll talk about here in a second on the next slide. It's more the defensive side as well. They lost a lot of the defensive side. And as your point earlier, losing Nico Autry, losing Aziz Al Shair, losing, I want to make sure I got everybody else there. Well, just those two guys and them going to a division rival as well, going
Yeah.
under D'Amico Ryan's defensive system. Not only are you losing them, but now you got to play them twice a year, and they were probably two of your best defensive players.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think I'm curious how that's going to affect the team overall. I wouldn't be surprised if their defensive numbers drop a little bit, but I think they needed to protect Will Levis. They need to give him options, give Will Levis some opportunity to grow, but also to give the organization to really get a good full understanding of is Will Levis is the guy, or do we need to go get somebody else here? Because as we'll talk about in a second with the acquisitions that they've attained in the offseason, this offense should be significantly better. And so,
Yeah.
but I want to throw a review here. What are some of the names that are sticking out to you?
Yeah.
Even though I think I listed off all of them.
Yeah. The Danico Autry and Aziz Al Shair are the two that I'm looking at that I think are really gonna hurt this defense. Also, the secondary, I think, while it wasn't great last year, losing all the guys that they did, Christian Fulton, Kayvon Wallace, and there's one more.
Sean Murphy Bunting.
Yeah, Sean Murphy Bunting. And so like losing all of that can't be good, especially when the secondary was better on paper than I originally thought. So they do still have a few guys that are still free agents: Ryan Tannehill, Trayvon Wesco, Jaleel Johnson, Joseph Jones, and Corey Levin. I don't. Most
All
of those
those
guys,
guys.
like
Yeah.
maybe a few of them will get on a practice squad or on playing some preseason games for some teams, but they're like those are all guys that aren't big names.
Yeah,
So.
no, the Ryan Tannehill's gone, but then also the two Trevor Wesco, Jaleel Johnson, they didn't even play more than 40% of their snaps. I think Jaleel Johnson only played like 23, and so I think that those guys are gone. And so not too many big names out there. Well, I would say Ryan Tannehill's a big name when you're the quarterback of the franchise for 5 years, 6 years. That's kind of a big deal. But
Well, he's not anymore. He's not what he was.
absolutely. So, but I think though. So as we kind of talked about, they lost some key pieces on defense, but they did gain some key pieces on the offensive side of the ball. Starting off with Calvin Ridley, Lloyd Cushenberry, who I also mentioned as well. Tony Pollard is going to be replacing Derrick Henry in that backfield, and hopefully with an improved offensive line than what Derrick Henry had last year as well. I think Tyler Boyd is also a sneaky underrated one as well. I think a good consistent option for him. Also, the two on the defensive side of the ball. They got L'Jarius Sneed. They got Chidobe Awuzie. I think I did pretty good on that one, actually.
I think it's a Awuzie, but yeah.
That was close enough. That's better for me. And so Kenneth Murray as well. And they did get Sebastian Joseph as well, but I don't think that's going to be as big of a fit. He only had 3 sacks last year compared to the sack total from Danico Autry and Aziz Al Shair, which I believe totaled out to 13 or 14. So the thing to me, I think is more going to be the offensive line improvements with Lloyd Cushenberry as well. They also did get Sadiq Charles as well. But then also too drafting J.C. Latham with the 7th overall pick coming in. He'll be the starting left tackle for that team. I think that it's going to be. I think they're giving Will Levis as much opportunity to succeed, to protect, but also to just improve this offense because it's such a scoring heavy league. You can't be barely above 30th in the league in overall total yards.
Yeah, and that's with that. So they went out, they got 3 new offensive linemen. Granted, some of that was replacements, but they went out, did that. Then they go out, they also get Calvin Ridley to couple with DeAndre Hopkins, and then you mentioned Tyler Boyd. I really like him as that third wide receiver in that grouping. And I will say, at the time of the signing, I was pretty critical of the Calvin Ridley deal. But now I think you look at all of the money that these wide receivers are getting, which is just insane. I mean, guys are getting
Yeah,
70 plus million guaranteed on over 4 year deals.
yeah. Calvin
Uh,
Ridley, he didn't want to bet on himself anymore. He's like, I want a guaranteed thing, so he'll
yeah,
take that money. I had to.
yeah.
I
I
apologize.
know, I know. But so that actually ended up turning out to be a decent deal. I still don't know if he's quite worth that money, but I think in a few seasons, him making $25 million will be a good value because he is 30, but he kind of missed really almost 2 seasons there in the middle of his career. So not quite as much tread on those tires, or
Well,
has a little bit more tread on those tires than a regular receiver at that age.
I will say too, if I think now would be a good time maybe to go on to that next slide, talk about the offensive depth chart.
Yeah.
Because to me, to that point, I thought about this a lot. And when Calvin Ridley was really successful last year with the Jaguars, it was when Christian Kirk was opposite of him, and there's a lot of other good attention that got brought to him as well.
Mhm.
I think you put Calvin Ridley alongside DeAndre Hopkins, and because D Hop, he's going to get his 1,100, 1,200 receiving yards almost guaranteed. You know what I mean? He's just that talented. And I think it's going to really open up the door then for Calvin Ridley to shine because he is a
Mhm.
little bit older, as you mentioned. So is D Hop, but I think there's still just a difference. But then he still has that capabilities to be a great number two guy. I don't think he can be the
Yeah.
number one anymore. And I think we saw that with Jacksonville when Christian Kirk was
He
on the field. Teams
he's
could
like a
hone in more.
1B
Yeah,
in my
teams
eyes.
could hone in more on Calvin Ridley, kind of take away some of his effectiveness. Maybe I'm reading into that a little bit too much just because of Jacksonville really started to fall off just as a team in general from injuries last year, especially when Christian Kirk went down. So maybe that had part to do with it. But I think D Hop being on the opposite side of him is only going to make Calvin Ridley better. So that's why I kind of do like that signing. It was
Yeah.
obviously it's not the highest paid free agent receiver, but it is. I don't think he's going to care too much if they make a deep playoff run. But then I really do like Tyler Boyd at that, and we talked about that too, just because you go look at all the starting receivers from last year's group. They're all second stringers now, outside of D Hop, Traylon Burks, Nick Westbrook-Akine, Kyle Phillips as well. So to me, I think it's going to be the storyline to me is one, how's the offensive line going to shape up? Peter Skoronski is locked in at left guard. Lloyd Cushenberry is going to be center. Daniel Brunskill was I'm pretty sure what, correct me if I'm wrong, the comments was right guard last year. But
Yeah.
how are those tackle positions going to play out? Is J.C. Latham maybe going to move over to right tackle? Sadiq Charles was the left tackle for the Washington Commanders, according to Over the Cap, which is what I'm looking at right now. So I could be incorrect on that. But does he want to slide in at left tackle? Do they try and force J.C. Latham to be there and kind of learn that position? That'll be interesting to see how that develops. So those, to me, offensively, those are going to be the two big storylines: is how does Will Levis kind of progress, and then how does the offensive line shape up?
Yeah. And I agree with that. Like, to me, especially after moving on from Derrick Henry, they're putting a lot of pressure on Will Levis to kind of be the guy
Mm-hmm.
coming into his second year. And he showed that in flashes last year. To be able to go through his reads and hit the open receiver. And he's a good athlete, has a great arm. It'll be interesting to see. I'm excited to watch him progress. I think he makes this division very, very interesting because if he is kind of the wild card of this division, excluding Anthony Richardson, which we'll get to in a later video. But
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Actually, I can maybe make the other argument that Anthony Richardson is the absolute wild card, just in general of
I
quarterbacks.
I I I agree. I think Anthony Richardson's floor is higher because he is a much better athlete. Whereas Will Levis, if he can't create in the passing game, then I think this offense is really going to struggle because I still don't know how good of a running team this is going to be with Tony Pollard as the lead back. So
Yeah, and that is an interesting storyline as well because everybody thought coming into last year Tony Pollard had the backfield all to himself, and they just did not. He just didn't perform. I don't know if that was a philosophy thing, and it's like they just want to throw the ball more under this Mike McCarthy system, or they just
so
didn't have good run blocking assignments. So
I have mixed feelings about that because I think he actually did pretty well in yards per carry last year. He just didn't score any touchdowns. He only scored like 3 or 4 touchdowns last year,
yeah,
and that was he just didn't get a lot of red zone snaps.
yeah.
So
But when CD Lamb goes and has like a nearly unrecognizable, like historic season, like with 1,800 receiving yards,
yeah,
you're like, yeah, I can see maybe there's going to be some more touchdowns going that way. But I do still like the player. I think it'll be a good fit. It'll be fun offense to go and see. I'm curious to see now how this defense shapes up as well, because the biggest thing is going to be how that defensive line comes together. So they still have Jeffrey Simmons, still have Harold Landry, yes, and so as well. I want to point out Harold Landry had 10.5 sacks last year. Jeffrey Simmons had 5.5. Arden Key is still on the team. Where is he at? Yeah, so the Arden Key had 6 sacks. So they still have three of their top four sack guys on the team, which is good. But still, when you go and lose your sack leader to Nico Autry, who's just a great player, just in general, curious to see how they go and replace that. If it's going to be kind of a
Yeah.
different defensive formation change as well. Here they have him in a 3-4, which I think that might still be the same. But
Yeah.
I don't think Sebastian Joseph Day is not going to be able to bring those numbers. If he does, it's like one of the best free agency signings Titans have ever made. But I think maybe it's looking like the philosophy is if we lose a little bit on the defensive front, but how much we improved our secondary, especially too, just starting off with the L'Jarius Sneed trade. Maybe it'll all counterbalance and it'll just be it'll get a similar result, because at
Yeah.
worst, if this offense is going to improve, you want to have at least just an average defense. You don't want this defense to regress.
Yeah. And that for me, you and I agree on this philosophy, but if I'm building a defense and I had to pick one side, like one area to be stronger than the other, whether it's the front seven or the secondary, I'm picking the front seven, because if you have a stronger front seven, you're better against the running game and you can get after the passer better. And I think they kind of sacrificed some of that to go and get a L'Jarius Sneed. And I don't know if I fully am on board with that. L'Jarius Sneed is a great corner. Don't get me wrong. I don't fault them, especially I think they only gave up like a third round pick
Yeah,
for
not
him.
that bad.
And so like I don't fault them for going and making that move. It's just I don't know if it's a debate between if I would rather have L'Jarius Sneed on the back end or Danico Autry and Aziz Al Shair
On the front end.
on the front end.
Yeah.
That's a good debate.
Yeah.
So
So we'll have to kind of wait and see. I think that's going to be the storyline for me. And maybe it's not even a training camp thing, because this is, I look down this list. I don't see too many guys that would bump up over these guys, barring injuries.
yeah,
And so I think that'll be more of a season line storyline, our season storyline, just to see how this defense does overall and if they made the right moves. But I will say I think in general, the Titans had a good offseason. I think they did improve. I'm kind of then looking at the schedule here now for the 2024 season. I will say, I think this is a pretty tough start. I can
yeah,
honestly see them going 0-5 during this stretch. We don't know how Chicago is going to be, but if you look at it on paper, like Chicago might be the best team in the NFC, just with how much the defense improved going last year, and then they only added. And then this offense, obviously, they got better at the quarterback position, they got better at the receiving room, they got better at the offensive line on paper. So it's like how all that meshes together in the first NFL game. That'll be very interesting. Jets, will Aaron Rodgers make it to play 5 of week 1? We'll have to kind of wait and see. But even then, on paper, I think this Jets team is going to be good. So that's going to be interesting to go and see, especially the two. If this defensive line got a little bit weaker for the Tennessee Titans, I think that's going to be interesting. But Packers, I think, are going to be really good. Miami early on in the season, especially
yeah,
too at Miami, I think that's going to be a big game. I would say if Mike Vrabel was the head coach, I think they've game planned well against Miami, but he's not going to be the head coach. And they don't
yeah,
have as great of a defensive front. So I think that's going to be tough. Then they do host Indy. So that's where I think I just think it's a really tough start to the stretch. And so you're really going to get a good tell on how you did in the offseason in this first couple of weeks.
hmm
And so what are your thoughts so far, like on these first couple of games for the Titans?
yeah. I agree. I think the first two are winnable, like very winnable games. I really think the best case scenario for them coming out of this is probably 2-3. You could maybe convince me 3-2, uh, but I think the Jets are going to be a tough team to beat, especially in week 2. Uh, if Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy through the first 4 minutes of their week 1 game, uh, like Chicago was one of the best teams in the last 6 or 8 games last year. Top 5 defense. This offense really only struggled because of Justin Fields' somewhat inability to create. Like that is literally what Caleb Williams was drafted first overall for, was
Mm-hmm.
just his ability to create. So I think like they have a bunch of really tough matchups. And then, I mean, starting out, the first 2 weeks in that second column there at Buffalo, at Detroit. Those are two horrible places to go play. New England, I think that'll be a close game. I think New England's going to be competitive in a lot of games. I don't think they're necessarily going to be winning a lot of games,
Yeah.
but not an easy mark in the win column. I think for the Titans at the Chargers, Minnesota, like the middle of this, I think is where it gets easy. And then you have a tough game against Houston, and then you go to Washington there, and then Jacksonville. So again, a lot of winnable games. I think it's just those first 2 games, the first 8 weeks, obviously excluding week 5 because that's their bye week, but first 8 weeks are tough
Yeah.
for this Titans team.
Well, and that's where I look at it too. Is and then 5 of their last 7 games are divisional games, so
Yeah,
they could somehow be hovering around 500 come week 11 if they're 5-5 or 4-6 come week 10, week 11, and if Houston regresses just a little bit, which I don't think so, Indy and Jacksonville stay about the same, where you're still kind of fighting for that wild card spot potentially, and all these great AFC teams start beating each other. They can put themselves in a position, I think, with all these divisional games, to bump themselves up. I think just because it's a divisional game, it's that rivalry. They know these teams so well. They have so much film on them that even if they're maybe a little bit of the weaker team, if they can game plan correctly, they can maybe come out and
yeah,
beat Jacksonville, beat Indiana, maybe even beat Houston, at least one of those games. And so that's why I think if they get to 5-5, 4-6, it's going to be really tough. To your point, in those first 10 weeks, but I think there's a possibility. But even then, in between that, they have a tough game with Cincinnati. So it's going to be interesting to see how this Tennessee Titans team does. I think they're going to get when I look at the schedule and the moves that they made in the offseason, they are going to get an amazing read on if Will Levis is the guy or not. That
yeah,
to me is when I look at the schedule and I look at the moves, that's what immediately comes to my mind, because on paper they've made the right moves offensively to give him the best opportunity to succeed. They got veteran receivers in there who, yes, they're a little closer to the end of their career. They're 29 or 30, and so, but still, though, veteran receivers, some of the top receivers in the league that we've seen, and even to go out and get Tyler Boyd as well, who has been, I think, just a solid, underrated receiver throughout his career. They're really going to, I think, get a good understanding on if Will Levis is the guy or not. And I think if they come out, if we want to move to our record predictions, they come out to this record, improve off of last year, going from 6-11, then to go 7-10 or 8-9, maybe even go 500. I think that they would be fully invested. Like, okay, I think Will Levis is the guy. I think Will Levis, we can keep building around him, keep making those right trends. I went with 8-9 just because I don't think they're going to make the playoffs here.
yeah.
There's still a lot of questions about their roster, but also to the AFC conference is just loaded with great playoff teams.
Yeah, and I think even you just look at this division: Houston, Jacksonville, and Indianapolis. I mean, Houston and Indianapolis were playing for a wild card spot in Week 18 last year, and then Jacksonville really had the division in their hands all the way up until Week 18 when they lost.
Yeah.
So I think that's like I think the Titans are knocking on the door to be competitive with those teams. I think they might just need another year to really be able to take that next step, which is kind of crazy to think about it because now you have 14, 14 out of 16 teams in the AFC are all legitimately vying for a playoff spot. Um, I think 7-10. I think this competition is going to be really tough for them. Especially they went through a lot of changes this year. I'm curious to see the adjustment on the defensive side of the ball and how that kind of pans out for them
Yeah.
because uh, not that change is always bad, it's just not always good, especially when you were around a league average defense and then you lost a couple of your top defensive players. And I understand you added some players to replace them. It's just, it's kind of like the if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing. And I'm curious to see what the strategy is moving forward, especially it talked about this video's kind of come full circle. What does this team look like post Mike Vrabel? And how do things go from there? Because I think Mike Vrabel did a lot to cover up some holes on that team that maybe the Titans front office took for granted.
Well, and I think too, we go and look. I think it was Malik Willis's rookie year. He was playing a game. It was a game against the Chiefs where Malik Willis was playing, And there's no reason why Tennessee should have been in that game, but they at the end of the game they
Yeah.
had an opportunity to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, and
Yeah.
all of that is from game planning. All of that was from Mike Vrabel. So that's where I think that's going to be what I think is going to be uh, a big question mark to see, especially maybe not this year, but definitely over the next couple of years, is how that coaching change is really going to affect it. And that's where, to me, I think there was internal disagreements. I will say that on how to go, because I remember when I saw that firing, I was like, that makes no sense. Like he did so much with so little of
Yeah.
this team, and so especially too,
Well,
as we all saw with Ryan Tannehill and how he was just slowly just degressing throughout the past couple of years of his career at Tennessee, and that was who his quarterback was, and they were still putting them in playoff position week in and week out.
the year that
Or
Derrick
sorry,
Henry
season
broke
now.
the year that Derrick Henry broke his foot and missed like nine or 10 games, he had them as the 1 seed in
Yeah,
the AFC. So they got bounced in the first round to the Ravens, but
and then that
still,
offseason was the offseason when the GM traded their best receiver.
yeah,
So
yeah,
so
exactly.
it's like I think so many things went against Mike Vrabel in this offseason. Or sorry, went against Mike Vrabel, and yet he was still able to
Yeah,
freaking put this team together. I think even that year that you're talking about, I think the Titans broke the record for players on a roster because they had that players that
yeah,
were on the roster at one point.
that
I think it was like 90 because they
yeah,
had so many injuries.
yeah. And so that to me, I'm just really curious to see what this team looks like post Mike Vrabel. What can they do? I It's very rare you see a team with a first year head coach, especially a first time head coach,
Yeah,
come in and really make waves. Last year with the Texans was very much an anomaly, especially to do that with a rookie quarterback. So see, like, I'm rooting for the Titans. I think they have a lot of interesting players and a lot of interesting storylines to follow.
it's gonna be
But
fun.
yeah, we'll just have to see. So let's go ahead and wrap this one up here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the Tennessee Titans offseason. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you have done differently? And on that, we will see you guys next time.